Hey, 7th graders, Mr. Ayler again with another one of our flip lessons. You should have just completed your New England colonial region, so now we're going to be on the middle colonies. The model looks, the graphic right looks the same, difference, middle colony up at the top, and then your stuff in here. Still going to be talking about geography, economics, social, and political, but for the middle colonies. Without further ado, should be just like what we did in the last video. Let's go ahead and get started. So let me make myself smaller. We'll get through the colonial. Oh, there we go. So middle regions, we're going to move slightly kind of southwest from the New England colonies, and we're going to get into what we call the middle region, otherwise known as the breadbasket colonies. This is going to be New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. And these colonies, when we probably should do the New England colonies first and then the southern colonies because they're a little bit of a mix. They've got some of that religious undertone from the New England, but not all of it. They've got some ability to grow some cash crops and things like that, but not all year round like the South. So it's a little bit of a mix. But to know which colonies are in the middle colonies: New York, that's us, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware, or the ones in the middle. Geography. Well, number one, it's very good farmland. We live in this area. You know there's a whole bunch of farms, and this is pretty much where the New York colony was getting to. We weren't here during this time period. This was still largely Native American territory, but the land here is very similar throughout New York. So you saw a lot of good farmland. You still had those cold winters, but those actually helped the farmland by providing a lot of snow that would make that would melt and give enough water for the land and things like that. You had long enough summers to grow, and you had some coastline that could be used to trade. So you did see a bunch of trading of those goods coming from the major cities, particularly New York, Philadelphia, some in Delaware with Dover and in Wilmington, but really New York and Philadelphia were the main trading hubs of these colonies, and they were trading a lot of farm goods. Oh, so did we skip one? Yep. So economic activities, when you think of middle colonies, you got to think of one thing. You got to think of farming. This was the breadbasket colonies. They were growing the things that we use to make bread: wheat, barley, rye, etc. Now, back during this time period, you did not go to the store a lot and make bread. You went to the store, you bought your grains to make bread at your house as you needed, because they didn't have the preservatives to keep bread, really fresh more than a day or two. So that was what you wanted, is you wanted those grains. Now, some of that milling process would take part in the colonies, but a lot of that was being shipped to the mother countries and then sent back to the colonies as well. You did see some raising of livestock. Our area today is big dairy farms, so you saw farms with cows and pigs and things like that. And then you did see some trading. Well, there was some labor of enslaved people happening on these in these farms in this area. This was not an area of widespread slavery. When you got to your major cities, your New York and your Philadelphia, you would see a rise in the population of enslaved people, but not to the extent we saw in the southern colonies, which we will talk about when we get to there. But when you think of the middle region, you got to think of farming of those grains, the breadbasket colonies: wheat, barley, and rye. Political activities. So we did see some assemblies, particularly in New York and Pennsylvania. The big difference with these assemblies is there was no real religious affiliation to vote. This could be anybody per se. So basically, we'll talk about this when we get into the colonies, kind of the five things you had to be to vote. For these colonies, it was four. You had to be white, you had to be a male, most parts you had to be over the age of 21, and most parts you had to be owning property. But that religious affiliation was not one in many of these colonies. As a matter of fact, in Pennsylvania, we'll talk about this a little bit more in the social aspect. The Quakers were about bringing everybody in and not kind of shunning one group based on their political beliefs. So there was, again, a more democratic atmosphere than what we saw in European countries during this time period. Social aspects. This was a much more diverse area than the New England colonies for a couple reasons. Number one, New York was already a colony. It was New Amsterdam, so there was already a large contingent of Dutch people here. But the Dutch also allowed a lot of different people into their colony. And as England came and Pennsylvania developed, and New Jersey developed, and Delaware developed, it kind of became a little bit of a melting pot, so to speak, of all sorts of different peoples throughout Europe, not just English people, but Dutch and Germans and things like that. The biggest one group that was kind of here, we talked about were the Quakers, and the Quakers left England again to practice religion, their religious freedom. They did two things that England didn't particularly like. They were peaceful, so they would not help with any of England's wars, and they did not like to pay taxes to fight those wars. So England quickly said, "Hey, you want a whole bunch of land in colonies? Promise just to take all your people and leave." So that was what the Quakers did. They allowed people to practice their own religion. They allowed people to participate in the democratic process. Women didn't have all the rights that they do have today, but did have some rights to be preachers and things like that. And in some cases, they were allowed more rights than their predecessors in Europe during this time period. But social aspects of the middle colonies were very different than the New England colonies. All right, that'll get us into the southern colonies for our next, but make sure you've got all your notes, make sure you've answered all your questions, and at the end of the video, let this thing play so it submits through for you on Edpuzzle. All right, till next time, 7th graders, Taylor out.